saying therefore we should live with the status quo, but development of large housing estates has always been done by private investors for hundreds of years.
From Shanghai?
Not from London, from outside, from Duke of Northumberland or whatever it may be. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but I just think it's such an old problem.
In fact, one of the litigations that opened up the argument about who owns the seat in the 60s, for instance, was to reclaim the keys to the private garden in the middle of those estates built by those dukes way back in the 19th century to public passage. The fact that things are built in a certain kind of way doesn't justify the way that then they become social in the way that they become incorporated in a certain lifestyle. It's a way that in which, in this case, the social is captured necessarily already as part of the value of what the investment is trying to be. The Duke of Northumberland, I'm sure, never cared much about the idea that somehow there was, maybe in a philanthropic way, he was trying to say, I'm the nice guy, I'm building this house, but probably was much more honest to say, it's a good capitalist thing because it makes me a lot of dosh. Well, this is a false pretense. That's what really annoys me.
Okay, I'm going to start a quick stack and I'll pass around in order. We've got one from the second right here.
Hello. One of the thoughts that just came to mind, I listening to everyone that's been talking this morning, was about this idea of engagement. And I think it just really actually upsets me, actually, because I'm not sure whether engagement actually is an artistic issue. Because we've talked a lot about sort of art and architecture, and I think when your question, one of the first things that was mentioned, you sort of said, let's talk about artists, architects, and something else. And I suppose that made me just start thinking, actually, that maybe the real creativity is actually happening inside these financial constructions, which are being used to develop these projects. Maybe that's where the real creativity is actually happening inside the projects. And actually, having looked at some of the sort of the complexities of trying to raise capital and finance for these sort of development projects, they are actually amazingly creative problems and actually amazingly creative challenges to try and overcome. And I think when we start to look actually at how artists are actually responding to these sort of complexities, and actually they're using engagement as a vehicle for the profession, for a vehicle for actually production of art. And I'm not actually convinced that actually that's creative. I think that I find it actually quite difficult to look at sort of engagement activity. And I've got nothing against engagement. I think it's a very important process. But I'm not necessarily sure it's actually an artistic process. And I think it might be something where it's something about justice, and I think you mentioned the word there. I think justice, I think that's a really great thing. And I think maybe the challenge that I would say actually is, why don't we actually look a little bit more honestly actually what's the creativity that is really going on inside these projects. Well, why don't we actually look at how capital, risk, and the time dimension has been dealt with? And I think one of the big challenges I see at the moment is that finance is very much focused on a sort of a linear mode of discounting, which places a sort of bias in terms of people's preferences on the present. And I think going forwards, I think there are other models of actually undertaking financial analysis, such as hyperbolic discounting, which actually allows you to weigh future preferences, future values much more equally with the present. And I think maybe the challenge I would say is that if we can start to use those models a lot more thoroughly, then we won't just be using endeavours for allowing a process to happen to focus on short-term change and to get people to convince to do things, because the future does not matter. But if we can actually go to the heart of the problem, which actually is looking at how people construct development models in the first place and actually get those right, then we might encourage a much more long-term thinking, which may help to sort of remove some of the sort of tokenistic sort of gestures which we kind of seem to be responding to. So that was sort of my sort of thought.
Thank you. I'm just going to, I'm going to take anyone, I'm going to pass the mic around to the couple who've already had their hands up. If anyone wants to make a point or ask a question, please do, and we'll try and every so often, if things seem to be directed to them, I'll let Andy and Alberto butt in, otherwise I'll move things around. Oh, yes, as well, yeah, that would be helpful.
Thanks. So we have to say who we are?
Yeah.
Okay. I won't be speaking this afternoon. I just want to come back to the point earlier about this being as old as the hills. It is, but I don't really necessarily think that's an excuse. It's true that that London does develop from the 17th century on by the great estates and so forth. And we could also then point out that those great estates were also gated communities. That that the squares in Bloomsbury were not public. That that these things were very, very strictly gated for a very particular social class. But I think as Alberto already kind of mentioned to a degree, this kind of negates the fact that from the kind of 1890s on, really, that London made enormous strides in changing that. The huge amounts of London from then on was developed by councils, was developed by cooperatives. Even in those existing spaces that were heavily privatised, that the London County Council took huge efforts to make them public. So it's old, but it's also it's kind of negating 100 years of attempts to make the city public again, and kind of hurtling back to the 18th century, which with generally less good architectural results, but with fairly similar social results. And I'm not necessarily sure that's a good thing.
I do wonder if it's a lot of these more open public spaces which are now being demolished because they're found that being too public simply doesn't work as a community. And I do wonder actually whether a degree of gatedness actually creates a degree of community.
They take ownership, don't they?
Yes.
Oh, this is the defensible space thing, whether it's a sense of ownership thing. Well, one of the things that came out a lot about the Haygate estate, for instance, when it was being demolished, lots of the residents groups that wanted to retain the place kept pointing out, we actually quite like this really big green space in the middle. We enjoy it, we use it, we walk in it, so I don't really see why a green space in the middle of the square, if it's got rich people around it, is okay, and a green space in the middle of the square that has poor people around it is not. Broken, and they say, you never lend me a kettle, and so on. The people sort of say, these spaces don't work because they're desolate. And then they say these spaces don't work because people hang around in them. And it's kind of, but are they desolate and people, it's the wrong people are hanging around in them. Or, I think the logic is often dubious about this, to be honest.
My name is Martin Slavin. Just a brief comment to start with about the earlier speaker who questioned what are the creative workers in this, and I absolutely agree with him that the people who operate within financial markets are very creative workers. But I think it's the use of the appropriation of the word creative, as in the creative professions, is something that has always struck me as very suspect. Take a nurse, for example, who's looking after somebody. She's a person in a position who has to make very creative judgments about how to handle someone who's undergoing a crisis. A parent is a mother is a very creative person in relation to what happens next with children. I could go on and go on. I have no patience anymore for people who assume that because you had a certain kind of liberal arts education and are middle class, that allows other people to be excluded from a process of creativity. I think it's a hideous example of cultural appropriation. That's not, however, what I would like to talk about. I'd like to respond to some of the very interesting things that Andy was saying about how an agency such as his intervenes in the process of property development. I think my concern centres on I found the description and the reality that you were describing about the subtle and astute ways of attaching yourself and engaging with local populations and the building developers in attaching or engaging with on-the-going processes that are already taking place within those communities that are already living there, that are coming to live there, and with the people who are the agents of change in that situation. But the thing that really puzzles me is how you are dedicated to a particular outcome, which is, you describe yourselves as placemakers, and that sounds like something which is an object. And what you are aiming to introduce into that process of placemaking is another object in the main, which is a work of art. I don't hear much from what you're saying about engaging people who are community facilitators in finding out what's going on there, what are the ongoing problems that lots of people are trying to deal with. Like the people who are working in the allotments. They seem to me to be a very interesting and creative community, but I didn't hear about you engaging with them, for instance. Perhaps I misheard and misunderstood you in that respect. But my central concern is this: you are almost like colonizers, people who have arrived from somewhere abroad, and you're selling beads. You want people to have an object or a series of objects as an outcome. And it's a kind of curious aberration. Do these people need objects? Do they need these bits of concrete that are placed between lots of houses? What you seem to be starting is a process of, for want of a better word, community engagement that has this narrow outcome. Community engagement, which is a community facilitation, are very worthy places or situations to become involved in processes. Why are there fixed outcomes, as it were? Why are there not people who are perhaps community facilitators who will continue to do things that emerge from the community that they would like to see done, which may well not be artworks?
Yeah.
Can we pass that back to Adam?
Yeah. No, thank you. No, it's a very good and valid point, and perhaps I need to just delve in a bit deeper about the role of objects within what we fundamentally see as a process. I think for us, some of the objects that might appear within this program very much sit as quite kind of modest moments within a much longer timeline. I think particularly on the clay farm scheme, I'd say all of the artists that we are working with have been commissioned because they are taking a very long-term view of their involvement with this project. Not that they might personally be moving to the area and living there for 20 years, but that they are setting up, each of them are setting up a process of engaging with those people that are invested there and are living there a long time, and whose kind of children will grow up there, and are creating projects which they are fundamentally involved in, and to some extent, kind of steering. So, I mean, for instance, with working with John Van Heeswijk is all about taking what was initially from the developer's point of view was going to be about an artist creating something to go amongst the buildings, and now that thing turns out to be potentially a kind of community centre, some sort of community hub, which can be an open space for forum and debate, and that's developing very much from a kind of grassroots level of Jean engaging with people that live in the existing community around, and increasingly with those that live within. Those play walls that you saw are sort of one small outcome out of a range of different things that Simon and Tom are doing on the site, working both with our steering group of residents, but also with the kind of children and young people services and some youth groups in the area about looking at how young people can play across that site. So I suppose I think I agree that the object is often a difficult kind of moment within a project because it fixes something and it predisposes that something has been designed. But I think I suppose what I hope at Clay Farm is that there is a sort of, it's part of a longer timeline of engagement, and it's a moment where people have kind of grappled with a particular brief in a particular site and kind of come up with a solution.
Do you think there's a kind of, I'm just thinking, are you actually also you're part of the role of the process, though, aren't you, with the developer? And I'm just thinking that if we are going to recognise that what's going on here is a process of actually engaging with the community, is really what the community might really be wanting is actually to have more laundrettes or more corner shops in the community, but actually what they're being given instead is a sort of an artistic process as an alternative because actually it suits the developer's own agenda than actually really dealing with the things that maybe people in that community might be wanting. And that's why I was just saying I do have big problems with this word engagement and in relationship to art, because actually, well, maybe speaking to most people, maybe if you're going down to the Haygate Estate or any of these sort of like intense social environments, I'm not sure actually that a whole range of sculptures and things is actually what is going to really be improving people's lives there. I think there's actually much more kind of fundamental issues such as safety, schools in the area, things which actually are a little bit more tricky to sort out and actually probably cost a lot more money to sort out. And that the alternative of actually providing some sort of artistic engagement process is maybe a kind of convenience to the developer because they can demonstrate to the, and I'm taking quite an extreme viewpoint here, but it is a concern that I myself personally have, that it's a more convenient and simpler alternative which cannot be quantified and cannot be actually, and you can turn around to the local authorities and say, well look, we've engaged these amazing artists who are doing all these amazing projects and are speaking to all the local school children and going in there and talking, and there's lots of things that can be talked about, but it's maybe not actually solving and actually engaging with people in a way that's actually relevant for them. And I suppose I just maybe wonder is that how comfortable do you feel with yourself in that situation, because you are actually part of that process in terms of what's being produced in the end from it.
Are you going to wait a minute before coming back on that?
I can do.
Yeah, I'll just pass at the back this way. Yeah, if anyone has questions, please just stick your hand up.
My name is Idley. I just look out, sitting back there wondering if this discussion should take place at Cass School of Economics or Cass School of Architecture, and it's a question of the role. And you had a lovely word about being the unpaid extra, and it's almost like taking a stand, we as architects. Are we with the invading, using the word colonizing army of money that is about to exclude the local native ignorant population of England to make way for wealthy global citizens who can afford it to live here? Because, I mean, cities compete for people. We've seen Detroit go from 2.1 million to 700,000 because it's lost out in the competition. So London has to do its bit to attract. Same thing, I guess, with Cambridge. They want a particular people there. So is the community engagement the sweetening off the pill? Is our role as architects to be part of sweetening it so the invasion can take place? The native, ignorant, local people are given enough medicine to swallow the changes? Or are we looking forward to a brighter future? Because according to what I've read, the government is buying now for the first time water cannons because they're suspecting great civil unrest. So maybe there is light at the end of the tunnel, that's not an oncoming train.
that if the government is buying water cannons, then things might be changing. So we may have a brighter future.
And we'll all have free showers.
Do you have one?
Okay, hi, my name's Nina. Quick question. I think for me it's interesting when you talk about cities in London, cities such as London. The idea also, what I've been thinking about it, is whether the idea of community actually exists in cities such as London. And if it does, what does it really mean? It's because I always feel this use of the word community is quite a flat bubble that sort of represents an idea of cohesiveness, an idea of unity, of some kind of, you know, like what you say, that London becomes one object. It's kind of a community of London of some sort. But does it actually really exist? Because my experience of working with public realm is that communities, doesn't matter which borough it is, obviously when we get engaged into working with them, we realise that it's fundamentally very, very fragmented. And it's kind of broken, you know, people don't really recognise the fact that they are living, they can be sitting next to each other, but having, what kind of constitutes the community? What's the bonds that we're working towards? That's something that I find quite difficult to understand. And if you could elaborate, that'd be great. Thanks.
I'll take one more from at the front and then let Andy interrupt it.
Okay, so my name is Carlos. I'm come from Colombia. So, I'm an artist working with the issues that we are talking now. So I just want to maybe point out the creation of value in this, like from the architectural side, from the design side, also from the artistic side. So we all create value either for the forces that want to produce money, or we create other types of values. So because, you know, we might all have different points of view and we all might bring it to one place or the other, but then at the end, what somehow is relevant is like what kind of devices or procedures or processes we build or agent for the people that we are working with or for these communities, and what kind of value they produce. If this value is given back to the people in terms of interaction, engagement, care for them to keep on, or just feeling proud of that they live in the area, or that that area might not be dodgy as everybody think it is, because it looks like a little bit unprotected and uncared, but that doesn't mean that the area is bad in itself. So that is also a type of value, and it always doesn't need to translate into shiny surfaces or into great places for investment. So, because we are talking about regenerating, what they would mean to regenerate. Is it regenerate to get and have a haircut or buy new clothes? Or is it more about the politics involved in this action? So all the questions and like matters if we translate into design, or if we can contribute to the companies that pay, or the institutions that pay for our work to happen, they are completely relevant, but the most relevant is the outcome that we try to bring into the world. You know, as you were saying, yes, these communities might need shops or school close by, and you know, and if you zip it like down, then everybody would want something else. One would have a pot shop on the corner, the other one would like a brothel or whatever, you know. So what kind of value is it? Is it one that is about diversity? Is it one that is that diversity like is producing more value, and who captures that value? You know, who captures that value? Is it the investor, the one that comes and take the value that artists and architects and creative humans create and take it out and put it somewhere else? Or is it given back to the community itself as a tool of like environmental care, and I'm not talking environmental in the sense of ecological care, but you know, an ecosystem that can keep on keep on going, and the most important thing is that there is some sort, and here I can use the word engagement, some sort of proudness of being part of that area, or of being part of the place that you are there. And I would make an example. We did a project in the red light district of Bogota last year that is happening to experience a process of small gentrification or slow gentrification, that in 20 years it's going to change or clean out the face of the center of the city. And for people, you know, are the prostitutes and the drug addicts, they don't have anything. We can't put them somewhere else, or we should then just keep them indoors. But there is a huge political value that happened in that area, that is political activism towards sexual rights and identity rights that would not happen in other areas of the city. So, you know, then as artists, we didn't need to build anything, or it's sometimes just like trying to point out or, you know, shine light into things that might not be as evident, you know, as this has some value in the agenda of like cultural rights and so on. So that's.
Thank you. I'll just let Andy know to respond quickly, and then if anyone else has any last quick points or questions, otherwise we can go through. Okay, I'll take two more quickly, and then.
Then I think we should break.
Yeah.
Just on that last point about you know, about value and shining, you know, the role maybe of kind of artists and creatives, and kind of shining a light on areas that they feel are important or need, you know, kind of need attention. I think certainly on the project I was describing, one of the main aims has been, you know, we're bringing artists or artists are coming to this project with an ability to operate in those cracks between the defined relationships between all the parties involved in that development. I think it's true to say that the developer that we're working with doesn't understand the full implication of some of the work that these artists are doing, but it's a sort of an ongoing communication between them, the artists, about that role. And there's certainly, I think, one of the main aims is to look beyond the kind of physical kind of design and infrastructure of the space, and to seek to provide a platform for ongoing and future debate across all of the communities. I mean, it isn't just a simple dynamic of an existing community and a new community. The existing community that's already there is already, you know, has already gone through, you know, a sort of 200 years of change and more of development, and there was a big development, you know, kind of there in the 50s, and there's always been a kind of a strained relationship between those two communities. So it's this kind of layering of complexity of community, which I think traditional, but you know, that those kind of structured kind of processes of engagement through sort of local authority and community engagement measures aren't really set up to kind of really, you know, kind of engage with an interest. I remember the community engagement officer you know, from the council of the area. You were saying, well, we have these things already. We've got, you know, a website, and we've got this. And then in kind of talking to her, and you know, kind of with some of the artists and some of the connections they've been making, it was apparent that there was a whole kind of, you know, other layers of kind of conversation with you know, that were just invisible to them. So I think there's a, you know, for me, there's a real kind of value in the artists being able to, you know, engage with the kind of social, you know, kind of design of space and the ongoing kind of social dynamics of those places.
Thanks. It's coming up. Okay, I just wanted to, I think if I remember correctly, the question that probably I should address more was one of the ones about basically which side are we on. pretty much, if you don't mind me taking it such a like kind of polarized way, and the other one is to do with community. And they obviously belong to the same category in a way, because the problem with the understanding of community, or the capturing of the idea of community as a forcefully cohesive entity, so that politically you can streamline your project in a such constructive, cohesive community, which actually means we agree. Yeah? I think the first thing that makes a community lively is we disagree. And that's exactly what is lost into all that, is that disagreement, which is also mean which side are we on certain argument. It doesn't mean necessarily that it's, I mean, it's very often one of the classic kind of antagonistic forms of talking about what's happening in terms of regeneration is class war. Right? Now, let's leave that aside for a moment, and I'm not saying that it's not true, but it's not the whole story. It's one way of seeing it. There are situations where, as an artist or as an architect, I don't have to necessarily align with local activists who obviously know and bear the brunt of everything that's happened in their place to make a point about spatial justice. Equally, I don't have to be playing the tunes that the developer engaged in creating this place has already set in motion in this deliberation of which agencies they're going to contract to deal with their own cultural master planning, the workings within the agencies, the short lists, certain specific artists who are the orthodoxy of the moment of what is good practice, and the funders who deliberate necessarily by their notion of good practice what art is good at a certain point in time. And the reason why I'm saying this, I'm bringing it back to funding, is that it's a circle. Funding, by funding I mean most of my work is always somehow, one way or another, there's been a battle to deliberate what is good practice, and therefore being on the food chain of an ecological environment where good things are funded, bad things are not funded. Right? Now this meritocracy, which actually we have already absorbed from the a kind of a certain particular economic doctrine, it's wrong to begin with. And the problem with the cultural policies since Blair onwards is that they exactly sucked in all this matter and then made it their own and created a meritocracy of funding which is based on case studies and best practice. I think best practice is really detrimental to an ecology of space and of practices themselves, as everyone in the business world also will know. That's what I'm saying, that this idea with culture and capital is bad for both. There are lots of businessmen that I'm sure they can't wait for this neoliberal phase to get out of the way and turn into something else, because they have lost badly in a certain way of understanding of making business, which not even businessmen can get to grips anymore. In fact, only finance is the one that understands what's going on, and they don't either, because they put us in this mess that we are now. So in a sense, the thing is that the foolish talk of the artist, the subjective foolish talk of the artist, is nothing as bad as the rational talk of the non-artists, which very often is the one that's got the highest pecking order in this kind of situations. So the idea of community, it's important because when you look at ordinary slices of life in the urban environment, as you probably do, and you're saying that you find all this disagreement, it's exactly what you want. To me, a healthy community is also a community that can disagree. The problem is when those disagreements are evened out because they are listened to in a situation which is already decided. The development is going to take place. Therefore, what do you want from me? Either sign with a yes or a no? Is that all I've got in life, these options? And no wonder people get disappointed and disaffected and don't even care about this. And when the artist comes, and this man is left, but was right in pointing out that all this obsession with engagement, this fetishization of participation, is exactly what produced another one of the orthodoxies of art practice in regeneration, which is the participatory artwork. And to be honest, I've done some of that stuff too. Right? But it's always a case of saying, and the one I've done actually was not funded at all. In fact, it was rejected by funding. And so the point of which side you're on connects exactly to that. the moment you enter as an agent, as a free agent, not a commissioned agent, or as a commissioned agent, but then you really look at the political ecology of a place, you cannot stay neutral. If you stay neutral, all you're doing, you're saying, oh, I've got to keep my cultural capital safe, because if I wreck the house here, no one's going to call me anymore and make me do another nice commissions like this. So my career is a make or break, or look in the other side when I see something that I don't like, or look in that way when I see something that makes me go the right side. I played all the wrong games. I've lost, I've won, I've lost, I've won. But you can't expect to go on creating a cultural environment in which everyone looks the other way when it matters, and you want to keep your autonomy of the profession, which is wrongly considered professionalism. That's exactly the problem. This professionalism. Professionalism means looking the other way when the political ecology of a situation tells you the opposite. Now, it's not a question of necessarily a moral economy, but as I was trying to say towards the end, we all operate in a cultural environment which is the total sum, and in a holistic way, the total holistic sum of all our actions as disciplined professionals. That's how we create it. So we created this cultural environment. In the last 10 years, I've seen conferences like this for once a year, twice a year. And I'm not saying that this is actually inconclusive, but I've been, this 2001, 2002, and every point we come to the crunch. Everyone goes out and does their own job on the field. It's when you do your job on the field that matters. That's all.
I'm just going to take 2 quick points, which I'll probably leave hanging. Or do you want to?
I think we should
Or
probably,
one.
can we break for now, because everybody must be hungry.
You sure?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Okay,
And,
sure, okay.
And could, yeah.
I would like to make a small point
Okay,
Okay.
small point.
before we break.
And
Very,
then
very quick.
when we break, could we try do that break kind of briefly, because we don't want to overrun at the end. So maybe people can just go down to the cafe. I think there's some food there as well. And maybe we could have half an hour break, if that's okay. One small point.
Yeah, okay, following on from many of the things that Alberto has been saying, it seems to me that placemakers like Future City are a bit like social therapists for a situation that has historically broken down in the past. And I think Freud once described psychotherapy as symbolic repair. And it seems to me that you are engaged in the social version of symbolic repair, at the end of which you have to accept the symbol.
Thank you. Okay.
Thanks for that. I think we can, obviously, at the end of the next, or after the next 2 presentations, if you have any more comments that weren't heard yet, can we just keep them for then? That would be great. So